The legendary OG content creator Kripparrian just finished interviewing Path of Exile 2's game director, Jonathan Rogers. In this interview, Kripp asked some tough questions, received a plethora of direct answers, and we were rewarded with a bunch of juicy new information about POE2, which will be going into closed beta on June 7th, 2024. Tala Moana, my fellow exiles, I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you'd like to watch the full interview, the link is below in the description. Otherwise, continue on for a succinct summary of all the vital information we learned about Path of Exile 2 in this excellent interview. Without further ado, let's get to it. Question 1. Is movement tailored more for controllers, mouse, or WASD? Jonathan responded saying the controller wasn't the first thing on their mind. Making the game feel good was top priority. Whatever made combat feel good, they would try. It doesn't feel limiting in-game having WASD and various different forms of movement. Really, your character's always looking toward where the mouse is, so it doesn't feel like limited 8-directional movement when you're using the WASD keyboard. Jonathan is actually going to be a WASD enjoyer in POE2. He was thinking it wouldn't work in melee, but it actually does. He used it both when he was playing the mercenary with crossbows and the warrior when he's using those big slam attacks. Now they do have step attack animations, which means animations change depending on how you're moving and where the monsters are. So this is awesome tech they have here. The goal is to never let you lose momentum during the game. You should always be flowing forward. But they have to make sure combat doesn't feel too floaty, so there's not going to be lots of abilities that allow you to use them while also moving, like Cyclone or like Rapid Shot, but you will feel as though combat is dynamic. Next question. Will attack on move skills have other penalties? So yes, you do have a 50% movement penalty on skills like Rapid Shots. Other skills will have this too, the ability to attack while moving before you arrive at your next pack. They do not want every skill to be used while moving. It is going to be rare, but it will exist. Lots of skills have movement built into them, but very few will be able to be used while moving. They are experimenting with other classes and skills specializing in this, but as I mentioned, they don't want combat to feel floaty, which makes absolute sense. Another question from Kripp: what is attributed to the class and what is attributed to the skill? Skill gems can be used by any class. This we know, everyone. Rapid Shot can be used on a witch or a sorceress. The only feature locked specifically behind your starting class is your set of 3 ascendancies. That is 100% it. They present classes with specific visions or fantasies to appeal to the greater public. They're trying to grab as many people as possible. The philosophy is being able to combo many different identities together to make a fantastic whole. And what Jonathan is saying here makes absolute sense. They are trying to get a huge market share with this game, and a lot of people don't get that you can have a warrior, but then you can actually use spells like Fireball as the warrior and use them in fantastic and unpredictable ways. People are usually much more simple-minded when it comes to games like this. They see that you're playing a warrior, and they want to know you're going to be able to swing a big sword or axe or mace and hit enemies with it. Then, once they get gripped by this, grabbed into Path of Exile, they will understand, oh my goodness, there's a plethora of different options I can have here and pursue and build a character unlike any other. Kripparrian had another question here for Jonathan. How do you envision boss fights and combat in POE2? Will they be slower grinds like the boss fight showcased in the Mercenary trailer? Jonathan responds and said, in boss fights, you have ways to execute a massive amount of damage. In the Mercenary trailer, you use Incendiary Rapid Shot, building up heat, then you fire grenades that gain fire damage based on how much heat you built up, and then use Incendiary Power Shot to explode them all. You have a combo that you know how to do because you've learned the boss mechanics and you know how to exploit them. Bosses can die fast if you know how to execute your skills. It took Jonathan 5 minutes to kill Ursia the first time, but it was taking others 1 minute max. Jonathan just needed to learn the mechanics to be able to annihilate the boss. Once you learn the mechanics, it won't be interrupting you as much. This is what they want. Jonathan, by the way, does all the demos himself. He did the mercenary and druid demos, which is awesome. He went from beating the boss in 5 minutes to 30 seconds or less. So this is phenomenal here. It makes total sense, and it's the same in Path of Exile 1. When you're fighting the Maven, you know when you can go in for attacks and when you need to spread when she's doing one of her wild abilities, right? This is going to be the same in Path of Exile 2, but not just for the pinnacle bosses. It's going to be for the campaign bosses too. And once you learn the movesets, once you learn how to exploit all their weaknesses, you're going to be taking down these bosses extremely fast. And I'm glad Jonathan was very upfront about the fact that he was struggling with a lot of bosses, as we are going to in Path of Exile 2, but once he learned them, he was annihilating them pretty quickly. Next question from Kripparrian. Is this type of combat difficult to tune with party play? So we're touching on the last question here. Jonathan responded and said, it is difficult, but many crowd control mechanics respond to the number of party members you have. They're hoping this balances out single players fighting bosses versus multiple people bashing against bosses. He was honest and he said they haven't done a ton of tuning on this yet, but expect to have it done once there's a bunch of mass testing. And everybody, we know this is going to happen in the closed beta. They're going to have a closed beta that is at least 6 months, so there's going to be a ton of testing on these bosses. Party play, solo play, all kinds of play. I'm excited. It's going to be great. Kripparrian has another in-depth question here that makes total sense to me. What pushes a skill and how much do ascendancies have to do with it? In other games, there are no other shape-shifting classes. The druid shape-shifts. In POE2, that's not the case. How much does the druid's ascendancies, for example, beef up something like this? Jonathan responded and was extremely clear about his answer. They tried to make the ascendancy relevant to builds even when you wouldn't think they are, in addition to the usual stuff you think they'd be good at. This is true for something like shapeshifting. You should be able to play a shapeshifting duelist, or witch, or sorceress, or warrior, or even a marauder, or monk, even if it's not the most obvious route to take. Great, they're continuing the Path of Exile 1 philosophy into POE2, but now there's going to be almost double the ascendancy classes. We're at 36 ascendancies. It's going to make for some absolutely wild archetypes and builds that we'll be able to build. Now, please, people, let me know below, what are you most excited to build? I can't wait to build shapeshifters in all different forms. It's going to be wild. Now, here is a beefy question from Kripparrian. POE2 beta. What can people expect out of the closed beta beginning June 7th, 2024? Jonathan replied and said the plan is to release the entire game for the closed beta. The entire end game won't be there, probably 60 maps as a starting point. There will be a couple of other endgame systems too, in addition to maps, so I'm thinking, this is me talking, probably delve, incursion, something like that. Back to Jonathan. They really want to make sure it's the whole campaign and maps so they can do progression testing. If they are not testing the whole game, they're not learning anything on the economic front. They want to thoroughly test the game to know whether or not they need to remove or change items and such. A good beta requires a sizable amount of content. There might be a couple classes not available to start, and he hopes in the beta people see it as bigger than any other ARPG out there, even as a closed beta. Me talking now. That is a wild thought and a flex from Jonathan. I expect an absolutely mammoth of a game in 6 months' time. I'm excited. I hope I get into the beta. Another question from Kripparrian here. Are there some things POE2 is tackling differently compared to POE1 when it comes to complexity? Jonathan responds and says, it's important they never dumb down the game. They want to be able to do wild stuff. They do understand they are known as a very complicated game. They've been talking a ton internally recently about this. There's a mix of factors involved here. They have a bunch of fixes in for new players in POE2, like the skill gem system. They have an issue communicating information though in a succinct way while still getting everything across. They're thinking about the common pitfalls. They might add something like pointers on the passive tree, telling players whether or not passives work with the skills they're using. They also plan on doing usability testing with just people off the street. Me talking now. That's an interesting tactic, but it makes total sense, seeing if a totally random individual can understand what they're doing with stuff on the passive skill tree, or with skill gems and the like. That'd be interesting to pull someone aside and ask them what they think Path of Exile is like. But of course, everyone, they know they're a complex game, but they want to stay that way. They are trying to remove the complexity and keep the depth there while also really expanding it. It's a tough ask, but they are aware and working on it for POE2. I'm pretty confident that the skill gem system is going to remove a ton of that unnecessary complexity, especially for new players. I've been reading a lot of comments lately, and everyone is on board with that and super excited. Okay, another question from Kripparrian. He essentially asked, logouts and portals, they still in POE2? So of course, Jonathan says there is a 2.5 second cast time for portals in boss fights only. Portals are instant outside of boss fights. If you die in a boss fight, the boss encounter resets at all levels of play. That's during the campaign and endgame. You can also pause the game during solo play. Kripp kind of asked, did you think that hardcore players would abuse this? And Jonathan just said, you can always log out and reset the boss fight anyway. Pausing is totally fine. What you cannot do is whittle the boss down with logouts and pauses. It might not be okay, but it's something you can do. There's no solution for it if it even needs solving. In POE1, the cost for this wasn't high. You could whittle it down. In POE2, that's not the case. They do, though, are aware and need to be careful about progression blocking bosses. If you cannot kill a boss in Path of Exile 2, you cannot continue the game. Players have to get good, and GGG have to not alienate people. Now, this is me talking. They're talking about in the campaign itself. If you can't kill a boss from 100 to 0, you literally cannot move on further into the game. That's wild, and he is right. He has to think about that. He is essentially saying, okay, people have to get good. They have to learn how to fight these bosses. They're gonna need to 100 to 0 it and knock it out of the park, but they need to make sure that this is doable for a wide enough area of the player base, or people are going to rage quit as soon as the bloated Miller in Area 1 of Act 1. We know that it happens with Hillock, and oh my goodness, I can't even think of the Act bosses. I can't wait to see them. Kripparrian asked a quick question, is it going to be one campaign per character? Jonathan responded and said, yes, you need to complete the campaign for each character. One character cannot help out another in the campaign. It works like POE1, so you can twink stuff like gear via your stash. This makes sense? No problems here at all from me. I don't think you should be able to make another character and then zoom it past a boss that your other character can't beat. If that character wants to progress to endgame, they're gonna need to beat the campaign. I'm a big campaign advocate. Why have the campaign at all if it's not fun and necessary to play? Really. I don't like how other games do this. Okay, Kripparrian went in on Ruthless and POE2 here. Let's take a look. He asks, a lot of POE2 features somewhat matched up with Ruthless features. How are you designing the pacing of POE2? Is there an abundance of currency and items like normal POE1 or extreme scarcity like Ruthless? Jonathan immediately admitted Ruthless did go too far. It also bundled in too many things in one go. If it was just item drop changes, making items extremely scarce, it would have gone down better. There wasn't enough attention paid to map sustain and other key details, like removing the crafting bench. They learned to not reduce access to content, and that is a massive thing that they will not do in Path of Exile 2. Currency, they think, was also too rare in Ruthless. They want to fix it, actually, but people attack GGG for doing Ruthless changes. They learned a lot from Ruthless, and one day probably will address it, but that's not now. Everyone can agree that the amount of items on the screen is too high, though, in normal PoE. For example, Mark Rogers, the other game director for POE2, is doing a wild item finding strategy in Affliction. He's getting so many items, he's DCing from the server when he presses Alt. Jonathan then went into a long discussion about what a 50th percentile player should get versus a 99th percentile player in terms of currency and just raw value. Jonathan thinks they need a disparity between 50th and 99th percentiles in Trade League of about 1,000 times between that average and the 99th percentile player to ensure there is always room for progression and improvement for most of the player base. However, on the actual ground, you don't want to see 1,000 times the items on the ground. You want to see about 2 times more items on the ground, but those items need to be worth 1,000 more than the items the other players are getting. This is a difficult puzzle to solve. Then you also need to think about how fast someone finishes a map. Consider a player who finishes a map in 10 minutes versus 2 minutes. There are all these factors whirling around in Jonathan's head, and he understands it's an issue, and they are going to address it in POE2, and they have a lot to announce and talk about in the coming 6 months. Kripparrian then asked about Magic Find. what do they think about Magic Find in POE2? Jonathan responded and said, the problem is that rarity in POE1 saturates quickly and it is not attached to a currency. They want to be able to scale value of things on the ground, and for that to work with all items that monsters drop on the ground by not only scaling monsters to drop uniques once you skyrocket the rarity. You juice a ton, you see double the items on the ground, each is 50 times more valuable and such. That is what they want to develop. They have a lot of changes in mind already, as we just talked about. This is just high level thinking. And they will have Magic Find in POE2 on gear. This is me. I'm not a fan of this. I don't like dumbing down your character or decreasing the strength of your character to put Magic Find on gear. I get the trade-off. I get that a lot of people really enjoy that, but I'm just not a fan. I feel like it's just an unnecessary layer of addition to the economy, and I think the game would be better off if there wasn't Magic Find at all on gear. That's just me though. I know a lot of people have different opinions. Let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree with me. Kripp has another question. Kripp likes guaranteeing some parts of making a character in POE1. For example, using a trigger craft on a wand with the crafting bench, or being able to find a tier 0 unique with a div card. Will there be an element of this determinism in POE2? Jonathan responds and clarifies a few things here. The crafting bench will exist to provide certainty to characters and fix issues with your build. That's vital. He also likes divination cards in theory, like in SSF, but in Trade Lead, it forces you to farm maps with the most trade value based on the div cards the map or the map boss drops. He doesn't think that's great. They need to do something different here. He likes div cards and wants them to return, though they will probably work differently in POE2. Me talking now, I do think the div card should be in POE2 just for the art alone, but if Jonathan wants to try to solve that issue with people target farming the same map over and over, I'm wondering if there are a few easy solutions here. Perhaps not attaching div cards to specific maps, but specific types of monsters that can be on various different maps. So it encourages people to run different layouts and maybe chase a specific type of monster. For example, something like the doctor or the nurse drops only off undead mobs in POE1 or POE2, whatever. I think that would be kind of interesting, and maybe Jonathan will listen to this video and kind of think about that idea. I don't know. What do you guys think? Okay, another question from Kripparrian. What POE1 league mechanics do you like and want to see in POE2? Given the ones Jonathan likes, will probably be in POE2. Jonathan responds and says he likes Delve, he likes Incursion, and he knows lots of people like Ultimatum. He also really liked Breach and thinks it was a good one of the first good leagues that they actually built. He also enjoys Delirium. Generally speaking, his favorite leagues involve there being some map with interesting mechanics on it. That's why he loves Delve. But he knows the community likes leagues which amplify a certain map or area. Jonathan also loved Harvest, but he doesn't like how it is now. He loved the OG Harvest where you built a garden. So me talking now, that sounds like Delve is 100% going to be in POE2. Is going to be one of the end game systems. Incursion is also likely, so that's exciting. We do know Elva is in POE2, so that's probably a given too. All these other ones, not so sure about, but we did hear that at least half, I believe, of the leagues in POE1 are going to be in POE2. He said it was going to be the majority in another answer that he gave on Reddit. So we're going to see a lot of POE1 content in POE2. Kripp asks, this league mechanic should provide rewards you cannot get anywhere else. Is this philosophy in POE2? Jonathan responded and said, yes, this is what adds variety to the end game. This will 100% be the philosophy in POE2. And that's fantastic. They've been moving more toward that as of late. For a little bit there in Path of Exile, they were kind of diluting all the pools and giving rewards from one league and other leagues and so on and so forth. Glad to hear that they're going to be going back to that OG philosophy and really the current philosophy that they had in POE1 for POE2. All right, a big one from Kripp about someone's favorite skill. Will there be a skill like the following POE1 skill in POE2? Righteous Fire. Jonathan says, yes, there will be Righteous Fire, although it will work a bit differently, but it will feel the same. Ideally, any iconic skill in POE1 will be in POE2, will be in the Templar announcement, probably, the Righteous Fire reveal. Ooh, exciting. So that's coming up soon, probably. I'm very curious to see what this is going to look like in Path of Exile 2. Now, Kripparrian goes into a little bit of minion talk. He asks, is there a push more for temporary minions, given the scaling for passive minions has fallen off in POE 1? Jonathan responds and says, when they talk about the Witch soon in 2024, there's going to be a huge discussion about minions. They know some ARPG players love minions. They will do right by minions. They are getting a ton of attention. They are actively working on the visual clarity of minions, which is a tough cookie to crack. Almost half the tickets and issues on Jonathan's desk at work have to do with minion visual clarity right now. Even with other skills too, which look modern and they feel cool, they are carefully considering all things related to visual clarity. For example, if something is on the blade of the weapon, that is a herald effect. Everything has its own unique place in POE2 until the MTX arrives. Now that's very curious. I'm not a minion player myself, but I'm glad they understand that there is a decent swath of the ARPG community that loves minions. Next up, Kripp asks, will there be a checklist of defenses in POE2 like POE1? Jonathan responds and says, it's difficult to say, but they don't want to force people to become completely immune to certain things on all characters. Mitigation should be a feasible option. You will need to puzzle your character, of course, it's PoE. Jonathan admitted he wasn't as involved in it as something like this. He is honest about that. He isn't in those conversations, but the lead balance designers are. Be rest assured though, you will always be able to completely mitigate some mechanics like stun or poison and the like. Great, good. I want to be stun immune. That's what I'm going for. Almost always hate being stunned. I'm sure many others hate being stunned too. Kripparrian then asks, with 36 ascendancies and a ton of choice in POE2, do you expect players to play many characters in a season or 1 or 2 per league like POE1? Jonathan responds and says, the same as POE1. They just want a ton of options available. They imagine people will play 1 to 2 characters. Me talking now. That makes total sense. 36 ascendancies is going to ensure people have a ton of content in Path of Exile 2 right when the game comes out. Because let's be honest, the content of games like Path of Exile are very heavily bolstered by the fact that character building is the crux, the foundation of the entire game. Building your character takes up so much time and gives so much reward to the player that if you have a ton of options available at a base level, and many of these are ascendancies, which are just game breaking a lot of scenarios, they make players feel good because there are many ways to break the game and build unique characters using systems like them. Ooh, another spicy question from Kripparrian here. It takes avid players about a week to hit level 100 in POE1. Should it take longer in POE2? Jonathan responds and says, yes, it should. Perhaps what it was 3 or 4 years ago, which was a bit longer than it is now. It definitely will take people a while to learn the game in POE2. It'll take them quite a bit to hit max level the first time, he suspects. He thinks it'll take people a super long time to finish the campaign the first time. It's tough and there's a lot to learn. They've polished the first half of every single act. They think it'll take the average player 40 to 50 hours to beat the campaign for the first time, which is about 30 minutes per zone, including bosses. He wants people to die on bosses the first time they play against them. You will need to learn them to win because they reset when you die. Whoa. That is a bomb. 40 to 50 hours to beat the campaign for an average player, and longer if someone has never played ARPGs. That's wild. I gotta think, how long did it take me to beat the campaign for the first time? Maybe 20, 25 hours, maybe shorter. I guess I could log on my first character and check, but that's a wild 40 to 50. I'm going to time myself the first time I play it. I'm probably going to stream it live actually in June, so everyone will be able to watch it live, but we'll see if that actually pans out here, Jonathan. Okay, now we're moving on from the questions that Kripparrian had for Jonathan and 2 questions that the audience had for Jonathan. So here is the first one. Tell us about the die system you mentioned in 2019, Jonathan. Jonathan responds and says, we can still do it, but they haven't thought about it for a while. It's not on their radar. They are focusing on content first, MTX after. It's probably not going to be there on release. And for anyone who doesn't know what he's talking about, they mentioned adding a die system for all the armor in POE2 because that's how they were designing the actual graphical engine. They can die individual armor pieces now. This was something that they were thinking about and probably going to add in POE2 way back in 2019, but that's not the case now. This has grown into quite the substantial beast, and they are making sure the content is there and the MTX follows. I totally agree with them. That's the way to go. Okay, great audience question here. 99% of POE2 misgivings have been about gameplay pace. How is the pace currently relative to what it was like at ExileCon? Jonathan responds, he goes in on it. At ExileCon, it was balanced hard. It was adjusted to a feeling of fun for Mark Rogers and Jonathan. People are probably ascribing too much to it. Harkening back to the earlier discussion about average versus 99th percentile, they want that disparity in POE2. People on Twitch see the top 1% of people playing and they see terrible visual clarity and the boss dying in 2 seconds. They don't like that. They don't know about the pacing yet. The peak will likely not be in the same as it was in POE1 for that 99th percentile of player. However, they want people to be able to break the game constantly too. He acknowledged that this was a non-answer and it's just hard to give a good one without true progression testing, which they're going to get when the beta finally hits. They know it's the #1 issue in the POE1 community about Path of Exile 2. However, they don't think it will be once people play POE2. And honestly, everyone, this is quite difficult to address without us actually playing it, building our own characters, rolling our own loot. We're going to get a final solution to it, finally, in June of next year, okay? I know it's been quite the debate all the way since 2019, but it's so close. We'll be playing Path of Exile 2 on our personal computers in under 6 months. And finally, the discussion will be at an end. Another interesting question, how much of the map should the boss be in typical endgame? Jonathan responds and says 1/3 should be boss, 1/3 should be the map monsters themselves, and 1/3 should be special mechanics. The drops should also coincide with those percentages. Very interesting. Okay, definitely not the case now. I mean, probably 5% of the map is the map boss. Maybe what, 60% is the map monsters itself, and the other 35% are special mechanics that can shift between the map and the mechanics that you're actually using in POE1. I'm looking at you, Ultimatum. Oh my goodness, will I ever find the trial master for that challenge? But anyway, that's very interesting that he's saying that. It's basically split 33% between boss, map, and special mechanics. We'll see how that pans out. Ooh, a big question here. Why did they decide to work on POE1 and POE2 separately? Okay, Jonathan responds to this community question. They want to be able to make the changes they're making without it being a problem with the POE1 community and game. In 2019, they didn't realize how big the changes were going to be and how much POE2 was going to alter POE1. It might not be the POE that existing players liked. They didn't want POE1 to hold POE2 back. They wanted to be free, but they knew they had to split it out. This is why the compatibility idea became an issue. Once they decided it, they went far crazier with changes. Stuff like WASD became possible. It opened their minds to new ideas. They want to support POE1 still because it's a great game. It's just a different one. It's valuable and tons of people enjoy it. Okay, me speaking, not Jonathan. Okay, so we keep getting mixed answers here, honestly. I don't know what's gonna happen, everyone. I thought one of the biggest reasons that they split it out, and almost the sole reason they split it out, were the animation and graphical changes, primarily the animation changes that completely separated out the feel of the game. Now, they might be referencing to those animation changes here with the changes that they're making without it being a problem with POE1, but I'm not too sure. So if they are going for a very similar feel and vibe at endgame to POE1 just with a lower ceiling, I don't know about this answer. It's interesting, right? Because they might be talking about, they don't want the ability to send 5,000 projectiles out from a Deadeye, right? They want 100 projectiles. That is a drastic change, I suppose. And it's a change that a lot of POE1 players would absolutely hate. And that could be why they're splitting out the two games. But I don't know. We'll really have to see how different they are once you get to the peak. It might just be that the apex of characters aren't as wild, but all the other systems are pretty similar except for the animations and going through the campaign and the way the gem system works, all that stuff. We'll have to see though. Like I said, less than 6 months away, everybody. Lots of rapid fire questions. Now we're just gonna go through the list. Right now, I'm gonna give you guys the juice. Will there be bigger or more in-depth hideouts in POE2? Jonathan says, hideouts will be in POE2. Mechanically, they won't change too much. He likes the freeform place to decorate, and the POE1 MTX hideouts will be in POE2. They don't plan on expanding them too much right now. Next question, will you lose experience on death in POE2? This is a big one. Oh my. In the campaign, there is no XP penalty in POE2. To make it challenging to hit level 100, you need a build check like XP loss though. They will have an XP penalty toward the end of the game. They don't know where it will be, but it will be there in the later end game. Wow, this is interesting. So I'm a fan of XP loss, but they are getting rid of it in the campaign. They think the bosses resetting is a big enough penalty. We'll have to see how that pans out, but I'm glad that it's staying at least a little bit in the game as a character check, right? You will only reach level 100 if your defenses are in place, or you can sit in 5 ways for a certain amount of time, right? Okay, short question here. We've gone over this quite a bit. How do flasks work in POE2? 1, only magic and above monsters will recover flask charges. In POE1, there wasn't enough stake with flasks, so they added some in POE2. Also, they will go back on the well if enough people hate it to refill your flasks in town. They also acknowledge that flasks are going to be reactionary, and they're going to be a resource that you can manage for your character to add on another layer of defenses or extra resource generation for mana, for example. Okay, here's a big one. Will you be able to edit maps in POE2? Jonathan says yes. Maps will have mods like in POE1. Plus, there will be something like the Atlas passive tree, but not the Atlas passive tree, plus other special mechanics. Okay, that's the first time we've received confirmation that the Atlas passive tree is not going to be in POE2, but there's going to be a system just like it. Will the Atlas not be in POE2? Will it not be the endgame? Could the maps actually be islands and we're going to be on a boat sailing from island to island? I don't know, we'll have to see. Next question, will MTX Preview be in POE2? Yes, they are working on it, and it will also be in POE1 because they share the same store. Oh my goodness, this is going to actually be in game. They didn't give a date, and they did say that this is going to take a while because there are so many different types of MTX that they have to account for. You know, all the wild goblin gangs that you can now get in POE1. It's gonna be cool. Moving UI elements, question mark. Jonathan says their UX designer is actually keen on something like this, moving your buff bar and such. It might be possible in POE2. Okay, that's super cool. I want to be able to move my buff bar. I want to be able to move my health and mana globes. That would be phenomenal. Please make it happen, UX designer from GGG. Closed beta keys. Jonathan simply says, look to the 3.0 beta. It's going to be similar. And for those people who were not here for 3.0 like I wasn't, it looks like it's simply based on amount of time you've spent in PoE and the amount of money that you've spent during your lifetime on PoE as well. That's going to get you access to the closed beta. So if you want access, make sure you buy their latest supporter packs. They're pretty rad, even though I can't buy them. We did have a console question here that Jonathan was a little cagey on. Someone asked, will crossplay and cross-save be in Path of Exile 2? Jonathan simply says we haven't announced anything like that yet, but console play will be vastly superior in PoE 2 compared to present day PoE 1. Take that how you will. Well, that's basically confirmed. Crossplay is confirmed for Path of Exile 2. Okay, maybe not. We'll have to see. Finally, we have the next drop of POE2 info is, Jonathan says, early in 2024. It's not too long off. Honestly, there's a ton of information that we have to announce between now and the closed beta on June 7th, 2024. So expect constant announcements from us with tons of extra information. So that sounds great. That's probably January then. It's not too long off, everybody, because we are right near the end of December. Lots of POE2 content is incoming. That's super, super exciting. There we have it, everyone. That was the succinct summary of the Kripparrian Path of Exile 2 interview with Jonathan Rogers. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I did a decent job there. And huge, huge thanks to Kripp for securing that interview with Jonathan Rogers. And big thanks to GGG and Jonathan for keeping that stream of communication constant about POE2. It is much appreciated, and it's getting everybody more and more excited for this awesome, innovative, next generation ARPG that's hitting the market next year with its closed beta. I'm hyped. I hope you're hyped as well. Let me know. Did you like the interview? Did you like his answers? Leave a comment below. Anyways, that's all for today. Hala Moana, Exile.